somewhere beneath the Atlantic, past the point where sunlight gives up and the pressure would crush a man's skull like an eggplant. There's a place every sailor who ever lived hoped they'd never end up. Not hell, not purgatory, something older, something the ocean itself seems to remember. They called it Davy Jones's locker. And for over 300 years, every mariner who drowned, every ship that vanished without a trace, every crew swallowed whole by a storm they never should have sailed into, all of them were said to have gone to the same place, down to Davy Jones. But here's what nobody bothers to ask. Who was Davy Jones? Was he a real person? A captain? A pirate? A demon dressed in sea spray and barnacles? Because when you start pulling at that thread, when you actually trace the name back through centuries of maritime folklore, naval records, pub songs, and deathbed confessions whispered by sailors who swore they'd seen something out there in the dark water, what you find is stranger than any movie ever made about him. Picture this, a map of the known world sometime around the early 1700s. Half of it is still blank. The edges trail off into illustrations of sea monsters and the words, "Here be dragons." The Atlantic is a death sentence. The Caribbean is a war zone. The Indian Ocean is a graveyard. And the men who sail these waters, the ones who actually survive, they don't talk about God the way people on land do. They talk about something else, something that lives under the keel, something that watches. They talk about Davy Jones. Now, before we go any further, let's get something out of the way. The Davy Jones you're probably picturing right now, the tentacle-faced captain from Pirates of the Caribbean, is fiction, brilliant fiction, but fiction. The real legend is older, weirder, and in some ways, far more terrifying. Because the real Davy Jones wasn't a villain with a tragic love story. He was the ocean's boogeyman. A name whispered by grown men who had survived battles, storms, scurvy, and mutiny. Men who feared nothing on land but went pale at the mention of that name. So, where did this legend actually come from? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. And that's part of what makes it so fascinating. Because unlike most myths that can be traced back to a single origin story, a single text, a single culture, Davy Jones seems to have risen out of the sea itself. Multiple origins, multiple theories, and every single one of them is unsettling in its own way. Let's start with the oldest theory, the one that takes us back to the Bible. There's a story in the book of Jonah about a prophet who tries to run from God. He boards a ship heading for Tarshish, and God sends a violent storm to stop him. The crew panics. They cast lots to figure out who brought this curse upon them, and the lot falls on Jonah, so they throw him overboard. And he's swallowed by a great fish, sometimes translated as a whale, where he stays for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the creature, alive, praying, surrounded by darkness and seawater. Now, sailors in the 16th and 17th centuries didn't just know this story, they lived in fear of it. Jonah wasn't just a Bible character to them, he was a warning. If you brought bad luck aboard a ship, you could be the next Jonah, tossed into the deep, swallowed whole. Some historians believe the name Davy Jones is a corruption of Duffy Jonah. Duffy was an Old English and Welsh word that roughly translated to ghost or spirit. Jonah, of course, from the biblical story. So Duffy Jonah would mean something like the ghost of Jonah or the spirit of Jonah. Over time, through the slurred speech of drunk sailors in portside taverns from Bristol to Kingston, Duffy Jonah became Davy Jones, the spirit of the man the sea swallowed, the original curse of the deep. If that theory is right, then Davy Jones was never a person at all. He was a concept. The idea that the ocean remembers every soul it takes, and that somewhere down there, a spiritual presence collects them. Not a captain, not a pirate, a collector. But that's just one theory, and frankly, it might be the tamest one. Let's go to Wales. In the 1500s, there was a pub owner in the port town of Cardiff named Davy Jones. Now, Cardiff in this period was one of the busiest ports in Britain. Ships came and went constantly, crews rotated, and the dockside taverns were the last stop for sailors before they shipped out on voyages that might last months or years if they came back at all. This particular Davy Jones ran a pub that catered to these sailors. And, according to local legend, he had a side business. When a sailor drank too much, or when a sailor owed money, or when a ship captain needed extra hands and didn't care how he got them, Davy Jones would drug the man's drink, drag him into a storage room behind the bar, and sell him to a ship's captain as forced labor. This was called being pressed into service, press ganging, and it was devastatingly common during this era. The Royal Navy alone couldn't fill its ships with volunteers, so press gangs roamed the streets of port cities, kidnapping men and forcing them aboard. But Davy Jones of Cardiff allegedly turned it into a private enterprise. A sailor would walk into his pub. He'd have a few drinks. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. And then he'd wake up 3 days later on a ship 200 miles out to sea, with no idea how he got there, no way to get home, and a contract he'd supposedly signed while unconscious. The men who went through Davy Jones's pub and ended up on ships they never chose to board, they said they'd been sent to Davy Jones' locker, the locker being the storage room where he kept them before selling them off. A dark, windowless room behind a tavern in Cardiff, reeking of spilled ale and salt water, where unconscious men were stacked like cargo until a captain came to claim them. Imagine waking up in that room, your head splitting, your wrists raw from rope, the floor rocking beneath you, and the horrible realization setting in that you're no longer on land, you're at sea. And the last thing you remember is ordering a second drink at a pub run by a man named Davy Jones. And if the ship they were forced onto sank, which happened with disturbing regularity, well, they'd gone to Davy Jones's locker for good. First, the room behind the pub, then the bottom of the ocean. Both were Davy Jones's locker. Both were places you entered against your will and never left. Over time, the story spread from Cardiff to every port in Britain, then across the Atlantic, then around the world, and the name stopped referring to one pub owner in Wales. It became the name for the ocean's hunger itself. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because there's a third theory, and this one involves an actual pirate. In the 1630s, there are scattered references in maritime records to a pirate operating in the Indian Ocean who went by the name Davy Jones. Not much is known about him. The records are fragmentary, but what does survive paints a picture of a man who was considered unusually cruel, even by pirate standards. This Davy Jones supposedly operated out of the waters between Madagascar and the coast of East Africa, preying on merchant vessels traveling the spice trade routes. His preferred method wasn't just to rob ships, he sank them. Deliberately. Even after taking the cargo, he'd set the captured vessel on fire or punch holes in the hull and let it go down with whatever crew remained aboard. Why would a pirate sink a ship he'd already robbed? Because dead men don't report your position. Dead men don't identify your flag. Dead men don't testify at your trial. In an era before radio, before telegraph, before any form of instant communication, the surest way to stay invisible was to leave no witnesses. And if this pirate Davy Jones existed, and if he really did send dozens of ships to the bottom of the Indian Ocean with their crews still aboard, it's not hard to see how his name would become synonymous with the deep. You didn't just die when Davy Jones caught you. You disappeared. You went to the bottom, and the bottom kept you. Whether this pirate was real or an amalgamation of several real pirates is impossible to say now. The records from that era, especially for pirates operating in the Indian Ocean, are almost non-existent. The East India Company kept logs, but they were more concerned with cargo losses than with naming the pirates who caused them. Most of what we have are second-hand accounts, rumors, and the kind of stories that get exaggerated with every retelling. But the name stuck, and by the early 1700s, Davy Jones had become something bigger than any single person. He was the sea's equivalent of the Grim Reaper, the last face you'd see before the water took you. The first known appearance of Davy Jones in print comes from a 1726 novel by Daniel Defoe, the same man who wrote Robinson Crusoe. In a lesser-known work called The 4 Years' Voyages of Captain George Roberts, Defoe describes sailors being threatened with Old Davy Jones as a kind of nautical devil. The context makes it clear that by 1726, the name was already well established in sailor culture. Defoe didn't invent it. He was recording something that had been around for at least a generation, probably longer. And then, in 1751, the name got its most vivid literary portrait in Tobias Smollett's novel, The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle. Smollett, who had actually served in the Royal Navy and knew firsthand what life at sea was really like, described Davy Jones in terms that would define the legend for centuries. In Smollett's version, Davy Jones appears to sailors before a disaster. He's described as having saucer eyes, 3 rows of teeth, a tail, and blue smoke coming from his nostrils. He sits on the bowsprit during storms. He walks the deck when the ship is about to go down. He is not a ghost. He is not a man. He's something else entirely, something the ocean created to collect its dead. This description spread through the maritime world like wildfire. Sailors who had never read a novel in their lives somehow knew about Smollett's Davy Jones. The description was passed from ship to ship, port to port, crew to crew, until it became gospel. If you saw a figure on the bowsprit during a storm, with glowing eyes and smoke pouring from his face, you were done. Your ship was going down, and Davy Jones was there to escort you to the bottom. Now, what made the legend so enduring wasn't just the fear. It was what Davy Jones represented in the sailor's worldview. Because life at sea in the 17th and 18th centuries was, by almost any measure, the most dangerous profession a human being could choose. Consider the numbers. During the golden age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730, the average life expectancy of a working sailor was about 35 years. Not because they were all killed by pirates. Most of them died from disease, drowning, or accidents. Scurvy alone killed an estimated 2 million sailors between 1,500 and 1,800. Storms sank ships without warning. Rogue waves, some reaching heights of 100 feet, could flip a vessel in seconds. Navigation was primitive. Maps were unreliable. And once you were out of sight of land, you were completely at the mercy of forces no human being could control. In that world, sailors developed an entire system of superstitions to cope with the constant proximity to death. Don't whistle on deck, because it summons wind. Don't sail on a Friday, because that's the day Christ was crucified. Don't rename a ship, because its original name is bound to the sea gods. Don't bring a woman aboard, because the sea gets jealous. Don't kill an albatross. Don't look back at port once you've sailed. Don't say the word drown out loud. And at the center of all of these superstitions sat Davy Jones. He was the consequence. He was the punishment. Every superstition was ultimately about avoiding him. Don't whistle on deck, because it summons wind, and wind brings storms, and storms sink ships, and sinking ships go to Davy Jones. Every chain of maritime cause and effect ended at the same destination, his locker. Now, what exactly was the locker? In the simplest version, it was just the bottom of the ocean, where drowned sailors ended up. But in the richer versions of the legend, the ones passed down through generations of Caribbean and Atlantic sailors, the locker was something more specific. It was described as a place beyond the deepest trench, a pocket of the ocean where time didn't move. The dead sailors who ended up there weren't at rest. They were trapped, conscious, aware, floating in the dark water forever, unable to reach the surface, unable to dive properly, unable to move on. Some versions said they could see the hulls of ships passing overhead hundreds of feet above them, and they would try to call out, but their voices would come out as the sound of waves. So every time a sailor heard the ocean speaking, the moaning and sighing of water against wood, he was hearing the voices of the dead trying to warn the living. Other versions said the locker was guarded, not by Davy Jones himself, but by the things that lived in the deep. Creatures too large and too old to have names. Things that had been in the ocean since before humans built the first boat. Stop for a second. What you just heard about the pirate code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement. The punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds. Grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. The kind of creatures that, centuries later, science would partially confirm existed. Giant squid, colossal squid, deep-sea fish with transparent skulls and lights growing out of their bodies. Anglerfish dangling their bioluminescent lures in water so cold it would stop your heart in seconds. Creatures living near hydrothermal vents at temperatures that should make life impossible. Organisms so alien in appearance that if a 17th century sailor had seen one, he'd have crossed himself and thrown every coin he owned into the sea as an offering. The ocean floor is one of the least explored environments on Earth, even today. We've mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of the deep ocean. In the 1700s, it was a complete unknown. Sailors dropped weighted lines and never felt them hit bottom. They watched things move beneath the surface that they couldn't identify and didn't want to. And into that unknown, into that bottomless darkness, they projected their greatest fear, an afterlife with no escape. There was also a belief among many crews that Davy Jones could be appeased. Before dangerous voyages, some sailors would throw offerings overboard: coins, food, personal belongings. The idea was that if you gave something to the sea willingly, Davy Jones might take the offering instead of you. It was a form of sacrifice, not unlike the offerings ancient Mediterranean sailors made to Poseidon or the tributes Norse crews threw overboard for Ran, the goddess of the drowned. In fact, this parallel is worth exploring, because Davy Jones didn't appear in a vacuum. He's part of a tradition that stretches back thousands of years across every culture that ever put a boat on the water. The ancient Greeks had Poseidon, who could destroy entire fleets with a gesture. The Norse had Ran, who dragged sailors into her underwater hall with a net made from the hair of drowned women. The Japanese had Umibozu, a massive shadow that rose from calm waters to capsize ships. West African maritime traditions spoke of Mami Wata, a water spirit who could bless or destroy depending on her mood. Every maritime culture, without exception, developed some version of the same idea, that the ocean has a will, and that will is not friendly. Davy Jones is the English-speaking world's contribution to this tradition, but what makes him unique is his personality. Poseidon was a god, magnificent and terrifying. Ran was a goddess, beautiful and lethal. Davy Jones was neither. He was described as something more like a foreman, a bureaucrat of death. He didn't destroy ships out of rage or jealousy. He collected the dead because that was his job. There was something almost industrial about him, methodical, impersonal, inevitable. And that, arguably, is what made him scarier than any sea god. You can pray to a god. You can try to please a goddess. But you can't negotiate with a process. Davy Jones wasn't angry at you. He didn't care about you at all. He was simply waiting. This indifference became central to the legend as it evolved through the 18th and 19th centuries. Sailors didn't describe Davy Jones as evil. They described him as patient. He didn't chase ships. He didn't cause storms. He just sat at the bottom of the ocean, in his locker, and waited for the sea to send him more souls. Whether you came to him through a hurricane, a battle, a mutiny, a reef, or simply falling overboard in calm water, the destination was the same. The phrase "gone to Davy Jones' locker" became so common in the English-speaking world that by the mid-1800s, it had entered everyday language. You didn't even have to be a sailor to use it. Newspapers reported shipwrecks by saying the vessel had "gone to Davy Jones." Politicians used the phrase in speeches about naval disasters. Parents warned children playing near rivers and harbors not to end up in Davy Jones's locker. And the legend continued to evolve. In some Caribbean traditions, particularly among crews operating out of Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, Davy Jones took on a more specific form. He was described not just as a spirit, but as a physical presence in the deepest parts of the ocean. A captain, yes, but not of a ship. A captain of the dead. He commanded a crew of drowned sailors who worked for him now, maintaining the locker, pulling new arrivals down, keeping order in the underwater realm. These Caribbean versions often merged Davy Jones with older African and Taino spiritual traditions about water spirits and the afterlife. The result was a figure who was part European folklore, part African cosmology, and part something entirely new, born from the unique culture of the Caribbean, where European, African, and indigenous traditions collided and fused into something no single tradition could have produced on its own. And this brings us to something that rarely gets discussed about Davy Jones. The legend wasn't just entertainment. It served a function. It was a coping mechanism. Think about what it meant to be a common sailor in the 1700s. You were probably illiterate. You were definitely poor. You signed onto a ship because the alternative was starving in a port city. You knew, statistically, that there was a very real chance you would die on this voyage. Not a dramatic, heroic death in battle. A miserable death from dysentery or scurvy or drowning in a storm at 3 a.m. while the rest of the crew tried to save the ship. And if you died at sea, your body went overboard. There was no grave, no headstone, no funeral your family could attend. You simply vanished. One day your family would get word, maybe months later, that the ship had gone down and you were listed among the lost, and that was it. No closure, no remains, nothing to mourn over. Davy Jones's locker gave that death a location. It turned the vast, featureless bottom of the ocean into a specific place. A terrible place, yes, but a place. Your loved one wasn't just gone. They were somewhere, in the locker. It was a grim comfort, but it was comfort nonetheless. It also gave sailors a shared language for the thing they feared most. Talking about death directly was considered bad luck on a ship. You didn't say, "I'm afraid of drowning," or "I think this ship might sink." That was inviting disaster. But you could say, "I don't want to end up with Davy Jones." You could joke about the locker. You could tell stories about him. By personifying the fear, by giving it a name and a face and a legend, sailors could externalize the constant dread that came with their profession. It's the same psychological mechanism behind every culture's death figure. The Greeks had Charon, the ferryman. The Norse had the Valkyries. Medieval Europe had the Grim Reaper. Davy Jones was the sailor's version. A way to look at the thing that terrified you and give it a shape you could comprehend. By the 19th century, the legend of Davy Jones had spread far beyond the English-speaking world. French sailors spoke of him. Spanish crews in the Pacific referenced him. Even Japanese and Chinese maritime traditions, which had their own water spirits, began incorporating elements of the Davy Jones legend through contact with British and American ships. The Industrial Revolution changed the sea. Wooden ships gave way to iron and steel. Sails were replaced by steam engines. Navigation became precise. Mortality rates for sailors dropped dramatically. But Davy Jones survived every technological advance because the ocean didn't change. Storms still raged, ships still sank, sailors still drowned. And as long as the sea kept taking people, Davy Jones kept collecting them. Herman Melville referenced the legend in Moby Dick. Robert Louis Stevenson nodded to it in Treasure Island. Joseph Conrad explored similar territory in Lord Jim and Heart of Darkness, the idea that the sea has a memory and a malice that no amount of technology can neutralize. In the 20th century, the legend found new life in 2 world wars. During World War I, the German U-boat campaign sent over 5,000 Allied ships to the bottom of the Atlantic. Sailors on both sides used the phrase Davy Jones's locker to describe the fate of torpedoed vessels. During World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic alone cost the lives of over 36,000 Allied sailors. The Merchant Navy, the civilian crews who ferried supplies across the Atlantic while German submarines hunted them, had a mortality rate higher than any branch of the military. These men, many of them teenagers, some as young as 16, were not soldiers. They were merchant sailors, civilians in civilian ships carrying food, fuel, and ammunition across the most dangerous stretch of water on the planet. They knew, every single time they left port, that a German torpedo could end their voyage in 60 seconds. They didn't talk about the strategic importance of convoy routes or the economics of the U-boat war. They talked about Davy Jones, because that's who was waiting for them in the freezing North Atlantic water if their ship went down. There's a story, possibly apocryphal but widely repeated, about a British merchant navy captain who, after his ship was torpedoed in the North Atlantic in 1942, was pulled from the water by a rescue vessel. When asked how he felt, he reportedly said, "Davy Jones had me by the ankle. I kicked him off." The rescue crew understood immediately. No explanation needed. After the wars, the legend entered popular culture in a way it hadn't before. The 1960s television show The Monkees featured a member named Davy Jones, an accident of casting that would later require the musician David Bowie to change his name to avoid confusion. In the decades that followed, Davy Jones appeared in novels, films, television shows, video games, and eventually, most famously, in Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. The Pirates of the Caribbean films, starting with Dead Man's Chest in 2006, reimagined Davy Jones as a tragic figure, a cursed captain bound to the Flying Dutchman, ferrying the souls of those who died at sea. The film gave him a backstory involving a goddess named Calypso, a broken heart, and a crew of men slowly transforming into sea creatures. It was brilliant storytelling, but it was also a complete invention. The real legend of Davy Jones has no love story, no tragic backstory, no redemption arc. The real Davy Jones is just there, at the bottom, waiting. And that's what makes the original so much more disturbing, because you can understand a villain with a motive. You can even sympathize with him. But something that simply exists at the bottom of the ocean, something that has no feelings about you at all, something that will take you not out of anger or vengeance, but simply because that's what it does, that's harder to process. And that's exactly what the real Davy Jones was to the men who believed in him. Now, there's one more piece of this legend that rarely gets discussed, and it might be the most fascinating part of all. Davy Jones wasn't always feared. In some of the oldest versions of the legend, particularly among crews operating in the early 1600s, Davy Jones was described not as a demon or a collector, but as a guardian, a protector of the dead. The idea was that the ocean was such a hostile, chaotic place that even in death, a sailor's soul needed someone to look after it. Davy Jones wasn't trapping souls in the locker. He was keeping them safe. Safe from what? From the things that lived even deeper. From the creatures and spirits that inhabited the truly lightless parts of the ocean. Places so deep and so alien that no human understanding could encompass them. In this version, Davy Jones was a kind of underwater shepherd. His locker wasn't a prison, it was a shelter. The drowned sailors in his care weren't suffering. They were being protected from something worse. This protective version of the legend gradually faded as the more fearsome version took hold. By the time Smollett described Davy Jones in 1751, the guardian aspect was mostly gone. The locker had become a place of dread, not refuge. But echoes of the older, gentler version survived in certain maritime funeral traditions. When a sailor was buried at sea, the body committed to the deep, some crews would say a quiet word to Davy Jones. Not a prayer, exactly, more like a request. Take care of him. As if the figure at the bottom of the ocean might, if asked properly, treat this particular soul with kindness. There's something deeply human about that. The idea that even the thing you fear most might, under the right circumstances, show mercy. That the collector of the dead might also be their protector. That the darkness at the bottom of the ocean might not be empty after all. And maybe that's the real reason the legend of Davy Jones has lasted for over 3 centuries. It's not just about fear. It's about the need to believe that even the most terrifying parts of the natural world have some kind of order, some kind of intention. That when you disappear beneath the waves and your body sinks into the cold black water and the light fades and the pressure builds and the last air in your lungs escapes in a stream of silver bubbles, that somewhere down there, someone is waiting, not to punish you, not to judge you, just to receive you. That's the legend of Davy Jones. Not a pirate, not a monster, not a movie villain. A presence, an idea. The ocean's way of telling us that what it takes, it keeps. And that the deep remembers everyone. The maps that sailors drew in the 1700s, the ones with the blank spaces and the sea monsters and the edges that trailed off into nothing, those maps were honest in a way that modern maps aren't. They admitted what we still know to be true, but prefer not to think about. That we haven't seen everything down there. That the ocean is bigger than us, older than us, and completely indifferent to whether we survive crossing it. Davy Jones is what lives in those blank spaces. He always has been. 300 years of sailors. Millions of men who went to sea and never came home. Their names lost, their bodies dissolved. Their stories forgotten by everyone except the water that took them. But if you believe the legend, and generations of men who knew the sea better than anyone alive today did believe it, then they're not gone. Not really. They're in the locker. All of them. Every last one. And Davy Jones is still down there doing what he's always done. Waiting. And the locker is still open.